few could live forever? That's the question that Natalie Babbitt asks in her children's novel, Tuck Everlasting. The book tells the story of a family of 4 who, completely by accident, stumbled across this water that made them immortal. They never aged, and they could not be killed, or even really hurt. A simple family, they carry on as normally as they can until about 90 years after the incident when a young girl named Winnie Foster stumbles across their secret. Now they're faced with what they should do with this girl, while Winnie herself is faced with the choice of whether or not she should drink the water herself and live forever. The book takes a serious look at this idea, looking at it from multiple points of view and asking questions about our own humanity. A couple of different movie adaptations have been made, and before you ask, I haven't looked at the one from the 80s, but that's not to say that I won't sometime in the future. However, this review will be looking at Disney's offering from 2002, starring Alexis Bledel, Jonathan Jackson, Sissy Spacek, and William Hurt. The film turned out a decent, if Disneyfied adaptation, putting more emphasis on the pain of immortality and still managing to get the same basic message across. But how does it hold up against Babbitt's timeless story? Let's find out. This is Books vs. Movies review of Tuck Everlasting. Let's get things started by looking at the pivotal character of the story, Winnie Foster. These two characters develop in kind of different directions, but the basic idea behind them is the same. They both come from a very rich, improper family, which they feel is stifling them, and leads them eventually to run away from home, find Jessie drinking from the spring, and end up spending time with the Tucks and finding them, in their simplicity, a far more loving family than the one she left. In the movie, the part is played by Alexis Bledel, and this represents the biggest difference between Book Winnie and Movie Winnie. Book Winnie is a girl of 10, whereas Movie Winnie is an adolescent of 15. The reason for this change is pretty obvious. The movie put more emphasis on the Jessie-Winnie relationship, turning it into more of a romance, and if you're going to have a romance between these two characters, then Winnie should be closer to Jessie's physical age, if nothing else. In addition, Winnie's reason for running away in the movie is a little bit more reasonable. Here, she runs away because her parents are going to send her to a boarding school. In the book, she runs away because she's bored. Actually, she runs away because she's 10. And that's often what 10-year-olds do. And the romance of the movie really doesn't exist in the book. I mean, yes, Jessie mentions that he'd like for Winnie to drink from the spring and become immortal when she's 17 and travel the world with him, but that's not so much out of a desire for romance as it is out of a desire for companionship. Basically, Disney did with this protagonist what they do with most protagonists that are based on book characters. They made her more virtuous, they made the lot against her harder, and they gave her a romance. And there's nothing really wrong with the character in the movie, and Bledel plays her very well. But I think this story works better if it is a little girl that finds the spring, rather than a teenager. First of all, she's more innocent and more ready to believe in that sort of thing. Second, she has more of a connection with all of the members of the family, not just Jessie. And third, her character is allowed to grow and mature a little bit more. She's a little kid, and that's what little kids do. It shows us that she's still growing and still learning, and I guess you could make that argument for the teenager too, but the character in the book is a little bit more flawed. Also, when it comes time to save May, I like the idea of Winnie sleeping in her place as opposed to running in and distracting the guard by screaming for help. The movie Winnie still has plausible deniability on her side, whereas the book Winnie is definitely going to get in trouble and knows it, and so it makes her just a little bit braver. While I like what they did with the character in the movie, I still like the original character from the book better. But now let's look at our title characters, the Immortal Family of Tuck. The Tucks are a family of 4, Agnes and May and their 2 boys, Miles and Jessie. Jessie, the younger son, features more prominently in the movie as he's the one who first encounters Winnie and subsequently falls in love with her. Jessie's attitude towards immortality is very optimistic in both versions. He loves the opportunity to see the world and do sometimes dangerous things and not face any consequences for them. He's a little irresponsible, of course, but it's his exuberance that Winnie is really attracted to. I think I like him a little bit more in the movie just because we get to see more of his adventurous spirit. Also, he does actually seem to grow a little bit, especially when he goes back to Winnie's tomb after her death and discovers that she did lead a full and rich life. He doesn't say anything, but the look on his face really says everything. Unfortunately, the focus on him and his relationship with Winnie kind of shoves the rest of the family to the sidelines. In particular, we really don't get to know Agnes that well. Here's a guy who wanted to do the very best for his family and who stumbled across something that he never wanted or asked for. In the movie, he kind of falls into the wise, all-knowing old man role, and we never really get an opportunity to hear what he thinks about the situation as much as the generic message of the movie.
Don't be afraid of death, Winnie. be afraid of the unlived life.
In the book, he probably has the darkest take on immortality, becoming very bitter about it, a bitterness that they eventually gave to Miles in the movie. May, likewise, doesn't have that much to do in the movie, and in the book, she is very much a mother and is going to care for everyone under her charge and make the best of what she's given. But Sissy Spacek's portrayal in the movie, however brief, brings this across very effectively. She definitely makes the most of every moment that she has, and I also like the things that they do with her personality, especially with regards to the music box and how she turns it to reflect what she's feeling at the time. And then finally we have Miles, who represents one of the biggest changes between the book and the movie. Both versions give us the same basic backstory. He's the oldest son who went off and tried to start a family, but lost his wife and children and continued to live on, being unable to age and die with them. In the movie, Miles reacts in much the way one might expect. The bitterness. Miles becomes very cold and mean-spirited, hating the world and his situation and becoming increasingly more self-destructive. Or as self-destructive as you can be when you're immortal. This is an attitude that the book doesn't really explore. Yeah, Agnes is pretty bitter about immortality, but his bitterness is downplayed more, feeling more like moping, whereas Miles actively makes bad decisions. But while this Miles is interesting in his own way, the Miles from the book is more interesting. His reaction to his immortality is to try to use it to do something good in the world. Even though he's lost all of these people in his life, he still tries to make a positive impact. He goes to war knowing that he can't die, and therefore knowing that he can keep fighting when the others drop. Movie Miles goes to war too, but it's because he wants to die and is fascinated by death. Ooh. While mildly interesting, his reaction is just way too predictable. And in general, the family is more interesting in the book because there's more of a focus on the whole family. Each family member views immortality slightly differently, and it's reflective of their personalities and their roles in the family, which, even after all these years, haven't really changed. Agnes is the simple man who doesn't like anything unnatural. May is the mother who is going to make the best of what she's given. Miles is the young man who wants to make his mark on the world, and Jesse is the kid who just wants to have fun. The movie doesn't really give us this array of opinions and philosophies. It's basically just generic good, generic bad, generic ambivalent. So, without question, the Tucks are better in the book. But let's look at the other characters in this story. Honestly, there aren't that many other characters in this story, at least not in the book. The story is mostly just focused around Winnie and the Tucks, which admittedly is probably where it should be. However, in looking at the different perspectives of immortality, there is an important one coming from the man in the yellow suit, who also serves as the antagonist for this story. Both versions of this character are about comparable. Neither one has developed that much, and I'm pretty sure neither one has ever given a name. They both want to find the immortal water and sell it to those that it was allegedly meant for. That is, those who can afford his price. He also can't believe that it's the Tucks, of all people, who found this water. He simply can't comprehend that people so simple as the Tucks would be granted what he sees as a great gift. The man is basically a salesman, someone who can turn on the charm when he's trying to make a sale, but can be incredibly conniving and ruthless when it comes to collecting his price. Overall, I think the book emphasizes the charm a little bit more, while the movie emphasizes the creepiness, but since both are necessary for this particular character, I basically consider it a tie. The other characters are pretty much just walk-ons. Winnie's family and the constable are pretty much it. But I think what decides it for me is Winnie's parents, particularly her father, played by Victor Garber. When you cast someone like Garber into such a small role, you know that he's still gonna give it everything, and he does. Where the father in the book really isn't seen that much, the scenes in the movie with Garber agonizing over his lost daughter, and then over whether he should sign over his land to the man with the yellow suit in order to get her back, is a really great insight into his character. And from the mother, we get to see her regret about how she treated Winnie, only worrying about her status and not really allowing her to grow. Stuff like that is brief but extremely compelling, adding to the whole life's too short theme of the story. And like I said, the book is mostly focused around the main characters, which is fine. But the movie's brief glances at the side characters really adds a lot to this story, so movie gets the point. But what about the way that things are portrayed? Let's look at Imagery. I'll be honest, I had a hard time with this category. Because, well, let's face it, nothing really stands out in Imagery. I mean, the book has some good descriptions and the movie has some decent visuals, but nothing truly outstanding. The book is paced pretty slowly in comparison, but it's kind of supposed to be. The Tucks live in a simple, slow-paced life, and the second act of the story reflects that. And there are some kind of goofy things in the movie, like the effects they use for the flashbacks, that I'm not altogether crazy about. The simple telling of the backstory in the book, with everybody interrupting each other to insert their own point of view, is much more compelling to me. But both the imagery of the book and the movie do a good job of conveying of what they're trying to convey. The book emphasizes the simplicity and family structure of the Tucks, whereas the movie is mostly about romance and angst. So when the backstory is told in the book, the whole family tells it. When it's told in the movie, it's shaky and jarring because Miles, the angst-filled character, is telling it. Also, I will say that I do like the way that they transitioned back to the present. That just looks really cool. But one important element of the imagery is how the two stories portray immortality, and in this, the book blows the movie completely out of the water. Don't get me wrong, the movie portrays it well, and you definitely get the same message at the end about how life is worth living no matter how short it is. But in the book, the whole focus is around these different perceptions of immortality. That's why the story moves so slowly. The story isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is how these 6 characters look at this concept. The different philosophies on what one should and would do if they could live forever says a lot about human nature, and what I like about these philosophies is that none of them are completely right or completely wrong. In the movie, we basically get the positive view, the negative view, and the ambivalent view. That's it. The views are still there, they're just not emphasized over the romance and the angst. And maybe it's just me, but I'll take philosophical discussion over infatuation and angst. And finally, let's take a look at the different stories. Like we said previously, for what these two stories are trying to convey, they both do a pretty good job. The book is trying to introduce the concept of immortality and present many different viewpoints, whereas the movie is trying to put together a compelling romance. It still has a somewhat bittersweet ending. Jesse leaves, and Winnie doesn't become immortal and join him, and eventually dies after having lived a full life. It's one of the few Disney romances where the guy doesn't get the girl at the end, and we're left to wonder whether he's starting to think maybe immortality isn't all it's cracked up to be. And even though we're only getting 3 very basic viewpoints on the subject, it's still a pretty compelling story about what it might be like to live forever. But for all that, there are still a lot of little things that just scream Disney. The romance is predictable, the angsty brother is predictable, and even the fact that Winnie apparently died at the age of 100 is predictable. Parts of the story don't even make sense. Like, why is the family trying to keep their immortality a secret from Winnie? In the book, the whole reason they kidnapped her was so that they could tell her about their immortality and impress upon her the importance of not telling anybody. In the movie, she finds out because Miles tells her in a fit of angsty rage, and it seems like the family never had any intention of telling her about their immortality or trusting her to keep the secret. What were they gonna do? Just keep her and hope she wouldn't ask too many questions? They did it because the story didn't have enough drama, and so they decided to make the reveal of the big secret an angsty one. But the thing that makes the book story so compelling for me is the focus on the family. In the movie, the focus is on the romance, with some secondary focus on Miles and the parents as kind of these all-knowing watchers. In the book, all the family members are pretty much on the same footing, and Winnie gets to spend some time with all 4 of them and learn about who they are and what they think about their situation. And there's very much a feeling of, this is what my family life could be like if there was more love in it. The Tucks are a simple but loving and welcoming folk, which stands in sharp contrast to Winnie's own family situation. The movie is about the romance. It's about how Jesse and Winnie fell in love with each other, with a side story about the dark side of immortality from Miles. And it's done well, but the book's focus on the whole family and the nature of immortality is, for me at least, more compelling. Honestly, despite the fact that it only won 1 category, the movie is a pretty decent adaptation of the book. But for me, the original is the classic story, and I like what it's trying to convey a lot more, so the book is the clear winner here. So with yet another win for books, Matt now has a winning streak to match mine. Alright, Hatter, I'll tell you what. You can pick the next review. Really? Yeah, I'll give you a chance to win your crown back. What should we review next? Oh boy. What are you looking at? Matt, I think we may have done our first completely gimmick-free review in over a year. Really? Yeah, take a look. Huh. You're right. Looks like the last one was Return to Oz. Oh, wait, doesn't this count as a gimmick? No, this is coming after the scoreboard. Anything after the scoreboard doesn't count. Who made up that rule? My review. Your review? Excuse me? Yeah, you were all ready to make it a movie-bashing fest, remember? Well, we'll see whose review it is when I school you in epic fantasy. Oh, good grief, don't start that again. Are you ready to concede the argument? No, because I think you're ready to concede the argument. I think you're ready to concede that this guy completely redefined fantasy, which is more than can be said. Oh yeah, you're leaving out the part where he did it with a snore fast.